Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Center on the Hill and the Presbyterian Church of Chestnut Hills Forum on the Hill. First forum of 2025. Thanks for being here on a 17-degree day. Thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Very excited to start off our quote-unquote new season of forums this year. With our very first forum here. I'm very excited because I've been asked to bring people from this museum here for a while, so I was really excited to be able to get them here today. As you know, we are being joined today by Woodmere Art Museum's docents on the road, and they are going to talk to us today about some incredible artists that are part of their collection, so very happy to have them. Woodmere's Docents on the Road is an outreach initiative for bringing Philadelphia art and artists to your community, and to present this engaging presentation and guided discussion based on these works in the museum's collection. So please join me in welcoming Nicole Ritter and Marcia Braverman. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello everyone, it's great to see you all here on this very cold day. I am Nicole Ritter and we're along with Marcia and we are docents at the Woodmere. As you may know, it's a museum that solely displays art and art from Philadelphia. And it is right down the street. Who has been to the Woodmere? Oh, that's great to see. Well listen, come back again and again. We always have new exhibitions. We have the jazz concerts we were talking about, great classes. There's always something new coming along. And we also have McGuire Hall that is set to open at the end of this year. It'll be another building of Woodmere's art to explore, so we look forward to seeing you there. So Marcia and I are docents at the Woodmere, but we're also part of this Docent on the Road program, which means that we take a look at some topics that interest us, whether it be an artist or a group of artists or a time period. We do some research and then we put it together. And then we go out in the community and present it. So today we're talking about family ties. We were just speaking to someone earlier and she said, I don't know anything about Thomas Hovenden or Ellen Corson Hovenden. So hopefully by the time you leave here today, you'll know a little bit more about these great artists. So the presentation's about 45 minutes long. So feel free to ask me questions along the way, or we can have a few minutes afterwards to talk. So let's get started. So we're pleased to present Thomas Hovenden and Helen Corson Hovenden, Family Ties, the story of two Philadelphia artists, also married with children, and the extraordinary work that they did during the Reconstruction era of the United States. So while we're here to talk about Thomas Hovenden and Helen Corson Hovenden, a retrospect of their lives could not be complete without a discussion of the country at that time. The country was at a crossroads. There was turmoil, divisiveness, and violence, and it was swirling as the pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions hit each other both in north-south and created such divisiveness and violence. It was an angry time, a dangerous time, and emotions ran high. The Civil War took place between 1861 and 1865, but the stain of slavery and inequity would envelop the nation far longer than that. The Reconstruction era, immediately after the Civil War, was an attempt to right the wrongs of the Civil War and move the country forward. Reconstruction, which took place between 1865 and 1877, attempted to heal the devastation of the country and the division of its people, North and South. It also sought to provide a roadmap for emancipation and equality for all African Americans. However, historians will tell you that it was not successful. And it was failed, many failed attempts to protect free blacks and from retribution and opportunity. The Hovedens were very influenced by the abolition cause and the search for African-American equality. The country's uncertainty and upheaval would continue during the most prolific time of these artists' lives. Although Thomas was a man of deeply held values and beliefs, it was Helen and her family's beliefs and mission that became a pivotal influence on Thomas in terms of his work. The search for equal rights affected each artist and their work in different ways. One would live a life of family dedication to the abolition movement and equality, and another would be a prolific artist of African American subjects and the first to collaborate with African American artists. This is an early photograph of the front view of Helen's childhood home, which would house many anti-slavery meetings. Here are their stories and their shared lives. Let's first start with Helen. So Helen Corson Hovenden was born in 1846 in Plymouth Township. Her parents were George and Martha Corson. She was a genre painter, meaning that she painted scenes of everyday life. Portraits, families, children, animals, especially horses and dogs, flowers and birds. In fact, she grew up in a home where some of you may drive by in our area, just a few miles away. This white corner house is located at the corner of Germantown Pike and Butler Pike, directly across the street from the Plymouth Meeting Friends School. Does anyone recognize this corner? A lot of people. It was interesting because when we were putting together this presentation, I would drive by constantly, just in awe of the history and the compassion and the humanity that took place on this property. The Corson homestead and barn behind it still stand here today. So this is a current picture of the barn behind the family home. Over the last several years, White Marsh Township and related groups have sought to stop the sale and commercial development of the Corson property, which included the legendary Abolition Hall. In April of 2021, an agreement was reached by the White Marsh Township and White Marsh Art Center to purchase and preserve the property. This was a very difficult time for the township and the neighbors, as well as the family that owned this property at this time. Helen's parents were not Quakers, but attended many Friends meetings and were heavily influenced by the Quaker beliefs and principles. However, her parents were active members in the abolitionist movement, and Helen was equally committed to the anti-slavery cause. In fact, in later years, Helen would join the Quaker faith. Here we see an early picture of the Plymouth meeting house, which was across the street from the Corsons' home. The structure dates back to the early 1700s and has changed very little today. It became the Plymouth Meeting Friends School in 1780. The Corson home was a meeting place and well-documented link in the Underground Railroad. It was widely believed that Helen's father was a conductor in the Underground Railroad, and many enslaved people passed through their home. In fact, people would come up from the south, they would stay at the Corson home, they would be fed, given shelter. George would then put them the next day on a wagon, brought to another conductor's home, either in Bucks County. They'd move up through New Jersey, the East Coast, and on into Canada, where they found safety. Legendary abolitionists Frederick Douglass, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Lucretia Mott were said to have spoken in Abolition Hall, which was part of the barn. In fact, George Corson was so concerned about violence, and it would spill over into the meeting house, he decided to put a second floor on his barn, and that became Abolition Hall. They could hold up to 200 people in that hall. Their commitment to the movement was a dangerous undertaking, but Helen was proud of her caring and committed family. She was brought up in a loving and supportive home, and her compassion for others was evident in her demeanor and her art. And yet one can't help but think that her childhood, although steeped in purpose, also led to her being very wary of hidden dangers. Helen showed artistic promise at an early age and attended the Philadelphia School of Design for Women, which is now the Moore College of Art in Philadelphia. A strong and independent woman, she traveled to Paris on her own in 1875 to study art at the Académie Julian after the death of both of her parents. The decision to travel to France alone was not well received by the remaining family members at home. It was felt that it was not appropriate for a single woman to be traveling in Europe by herself. However, she traveled despite their lack of support and stayed in France for 5 years with friends. She was invited to exhibit at the Paris salons, which was truly an honor at that time, especially for a woman. This honor included such renowned artists as Edward Manet, Edward Degas, and fellow Philadelphian Mary Cassatt. Ironically, the work of these artists would later be rejected by the salon juries in Paris. These artists, however, became Impressionists. Helen is here in this picture, in this photo, as a young mother, along with her daughter Martha, who would also someday follow in her parents' footsteps. During her time in France, Helen met Thomas Hoveden while visiting the countryside of Brittany. They soon returned to Paris to work together and to continue their courtship. They came back to the United States and would marry in 1881. She was 35 at that time, which was considered very late for marriage, but it was not surprising. As we saw with her decision to go abroad, she was driven, not concerned, by the social norms of the day. She was fiercely independent and confident in her abilities. Not surprisingly, she was a strong supporter of women's suffrage. Helen and Thomas moved into her parents' home in Plymouth Meeting, and they set up a studio in Abolition Hall. The Hovedens would proceed to have 2 children, Martha, named after her mother, and Thomas, or Toss, as he was referred to often. In this photograph from the early 1900s, the Hoveden family are in their backyard with friends. So let's take a look at some of Helen's work. This is an oil on canvas, which is part of the permanent collection at Woodmere. Shows a little girl and a dog. Let's have some group thought here. What do you think about this? How does it make you feel, and what do you see when you look at this painting? Any thoughts?
Concern in her eyes.
Concern in her eyes. So why do you say that? What is it about her eyes that make you say that?
She's looking steadily at something. It doesn't give me a hint of a smile or anything like that.
She's looking straight at us, right?
Mhm.
She's looking directly at us. There's a little bit of a concern in her eyes, whether it be sadness, concern. When I show this to children, a lot of times they say, she just looks hot. You know, she's inside, she's got her hood on, she's got her up, she's got her hood. She just looks uncomfortable, right? What about the relationship between her and the dog?
The dog looks protected to me.
The dog looks protected to you. Yeah, they're very close together, aren't they? I'm sorry?
No, was this a portrait commissioned by a wealthy family? The little girl's, fur-lined cape and so on. Was it that sort of commission?
Well, I'll tell you what. This is Martha, Helen's daughter. So this is a work that Helen did of her daughter and one of their family dogs. You can see the relation. There is a connection between her and the dog. Especially if you look around the dog, you see a little bit of red on the other side. So perhaps even Martha had her arm around the dog itself. Interesting too, the fur on the rug is wolf fur. And evidently there is a piece of this rug somewhere in the United States today. Let's look at another artwork of hers. So your thoughts on this? I hear, what are your thoughts on this? How does this one make you feel, and what do you see that you like in this painting?
It's charming. And she's showing off that she knows how to do textiles and hair and fur and it's very charming.
It's what strikes me first is those eyes of the dog. Look at the eyes of the dog. There is loyalty there, there's intensity there, and there's love there. What I also find interesting about this is you don't see, this is Martha, you don't see Martha's face. You just can imagine what her face looks like. I also see this as a very quiet setting, but then you hear the harmonica. Little Martha's playing the harmonica. This is part of our permanent collection as well. And the name of this artwork is called The Concert. What's also really interesting is you have the dark, the black of this side of the canvas, and the lightness over there kind of draws our eye across from the dog over to the little girl. And I agree with you, I love the collar, the way her collar lays on her shoulders, and the wisps of her hair on the back of her neck. This is certainly one of my favorites.
The color of her hair as well as matches the color of the dog's fur. I mean, and that also draws your eye up.
It certainly does. It certainly does. Yep. It's just a beautiful, beautiful painting. So while, like many artists, Helen also worked with pencil. Sometimes she would do it before she would put brush to canvas. I think this was a completed piece of hers, pencil, very detailed. We don't know if this is Martha or not, or maybe a commission from another family. They had asked her to do this. Very detailed, just a little girl, head on her desk, fell asleep while she was reading. Very sweet piece. Okay, so this was done in 1875 when Helen was in Brittany. It was an early part of her career, so her talent and her expertise was still developing. But what you do see is something that you don't see of hers very often, is the design, the architecture of the building behind her. It's very well done at an early age. What it also includes, though, are her favorite horses. She included these horses with two gentlemen, but what makes it very, very Helen is that she added a little girl and a toy, which gives us a completely different feel, different take of this painting than you would without the little girl in that painting. Kind of a lot of somber tones, browns, softness, but this is certainly one of her earlier works. So as I mentioned, horses were one of her favorite things to paint. They lived on a working farm, so there were horses and dogs and donkeys, and I'm sure a few cats in there too. So this was really a part of their life, the barn, the house, certainly Abolition Hall. A lot of times an artist, to draw your attention, will make a subject white or light or in the sun or a bright red color. Clearly, the whiteness of this horse is drawing our attention and our eyes to that. What strikes me about this too is the heavy bridle on the horse, the white horse's back. So this is also a departure for Helen, kind of a stark painting. Any thoughts on this?
I don't like dead
Yeah.
animals.
It's quite startling. We've got those soft dead birds on a very hard plank. What strikes me about this one is how the birds are kind of rounded, and it kind of replicates the roundness of the design on the top of this board, which is rather interesting. Also impressed by the speckling of this one bird's breast. The detail is really quite something. This is part of a tradition called Memento Mori, which is a Latin name, which means remember death or remember you must die. It was primarily done in the 1700s, but for some reason, Helen decided to use that technique here. So Helen also used photos prior to painting. And here is one, as you can imagine, this is probably Martha again, struck by the beautiful lace detail of her blouse and her pale blue dress. I guess pale blue was probably one of her favorite colors. And another horse picture. So while her husband's work was prolific and well documented, as he exhibited quite often, Helen's work was less available to the public, despite her participation in many exhibits. This is not surprising, as it was a sign of the times that women and therefore their art were not celebrated as much. As a result, there were limited examples of her work available when we put together this presentation. Other than the 3 works in the collection that I've shown you, most of the artwork shown to you today are a part of a private collection, and we begged and we borrowed for whatever we could find, and her family was very generous with what they showed us, including a lot of these photos. So while she was an accomplished painter, Helen was also a prolific photographer. In fact, when she was younger, her parents gave her her first camera. She often documented life in the home and in the community, giving us a peek into their family lives and the lives of those around them. While she never gave up painting in favor of photography, photography was a passion of hers which she continued throughout her very long life. Here we have 2 photographs taken by Helen, which show a gentleman and horses depicting the simple life on the left, and then a group of adults here and children, smartly dressed. Looks like they were just playing tennis or about to play tennis.
Is that Martha?
I think so. I think so. The life in the small enclave just north of Philadelphia was a great source of inspiration and creativity in her photography. Neighbors and friends were often models, and the tribulations of a changing society were the subject of her work. These photographs by Helen gave dignity to the common man in the community, not seen in earlier work by others. This is where her humanity and progressive ideals shone the brightest. The boy on the left was actually a model for several of Thomas's paintings. And of course on the right we have a little girl and a boy, probably from the neighborhood, being pulled by a donkey.
It was a goat.
It was a sheep.
I'm sorry?
I said, I thought it was a goat.
Oh, it's a donkey, yeah. We can go back. It's,
I think it is a goat.
is it goat? Okay, you're right. I've been saying donkey all these years. Okay, thank you. So the Hovedens were a close-knit family, and their children were an integral part of their daily lives. Thomas Jr. graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in civil engineering. Tragically, at the age of 33, he died of typhoid fever when he was traveling in Panama for work. Martha did follow in her parents' footsteps. She attended Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and she developed a close friendship with Violet Oakley, a legendary artist in Philadelphia. She became an advocate in the suffrage cause as well. Martha's most notable work were 2 limestone panels in Washington Memorial Park in Valley Forge that still stand there today. Here is it was a photo of the 2 of them on stilts in their backyard. So interestingly, while the Quaker values were undeniably a large part of Helen's life, those who visited the Hovenden home were quite surprised and impressed by the latest in fashionable furnishings. By no means was this a Quaker home rooted in simplicity. The walls of their home were filled with art and photography. The larger painting over the couch, if you can see that on the left, is one of Thomas's most recognizable paintings, entitled In Hoc Signa Vinces. You'll learn a little bit more about this work in just a few minutes. So let's hear a little bit about Thomas Hovenden.
Good afternoon. My name is Marcia Brofferman, and I'm thrilled to be with you today. And I'm also so happy to talk to you about one of my favorite Philadelphia artists, and that is Thomas Hovenden. So I'll begin by giving you a brief biography on his life, and then we can, take a deep dive into, and you can see some of his work.
Would you talk a little louder, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's better? Okay.
Yes.
Born on December 28th in 1840 in County Cork, Ireland, Thomas Hovenden was the son of Ellen Bryan and Robert Hovenden. His father was of English ancestry and Protestant faith. Hovenden had an older brother, John, and a younger sister, Elizabeth. Sadly, when he was 6 years old, his parents died, both of them during the potato famine, which was a period of mass starvation and disease in Ireland. He was placed in an orphanage 37 miles from Cork and separated from his brother and sister. They were all put in separate orphanages. So, as you can imagine, at the age of 6 years old, he was grief-stricken by the death of his parents and the separation of his siblings. He learned about loss and heartache at an early age. And this may account for the recurring theme of enduring ties of home and family, which you will see in much of his work. At the age of 14, he began a 7-year apprenticeship with George Tollerton, who was a cabinet maker and gilder in Cork. Hovenden's talent for drawing impressed Tollerton, and after 3 years, he sent Hovenden to the Cork School of Design. There he was one of 150 students, many who were women, but he studied decorative art, design, color, painting, and ornaments. He began to think about becoming an artist full-time, because at that time, generally, an artisan was not considered as superior as an artist was. So in 1863, at the age of 23, he immigrated to the United States to join his brother John in New York, who had already emigrated. And they both settled in Greenwich Village. And by 1866, he secured space for a framing shop, which he learned from Mr. Tollerton, and also a studio. He attended classes at the National Academy of Design in New York, and there he met his lifelong friend, H. Bolton Jones of Baltimore, who became a very well-known landscape painter at the time. So then Jones and Hovenden moved to Baltimore in 1868, after Hovenden fulfilled his residence requirements for naturalization. So it was in Baltimore his studio attracted patrons who encouraged and purchased his work. William Walters was an owner of a wholesale liquor company and an art collector, and he urged Hovenden to travel to Europe and study the masters. His business partner, Walter's business partner, was also a collector of contemporary American artists, and he provided the financial support that allowed Thomas to go and study in Paris. So in 1874, Hovenden left for Paris and spent 6 years studying in France. Hovenden was introduced to Alexandre Cabanel, who was one of the 3 leading painting masters at the time, at the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts. So Hovenden gained Cabanel's permission to train at his atelier. Though he studied for 1 year under Cabanel, that training influenced Hovenden's work, particularly his knowledge of the human figure and his composition. So while studying in Paris in 1875, Hovenden painted this painting called Artist in His Studio. And it really is a self-portrait of Hovenden. But I think it's a very idealized impression of what at that time people thought artists looked like. I mean, if you look at this picture, his feet are on the stool. He sort of looks a little cocky, leaning back. He has a cigarette hanging from his mouth, a floppy red scarf, sort of a balloony white shirt. It's wonderful the way the sun comes through on the side of his face, because basically we're looking at a very dark studio. But I also think it's very interesting. There's a palette over his head with some brushes, but what is he holding? A violin. He's holding a violin on one hand and a bow in the other. So I think what this really is showing his realization of all the arts, the performing arts as well as the visual arts, really work hand in hand. So it's a beautiful painting, and it really shows how the man can draw. He really was a wonderful draftsman, and he also had a very good eye for composition.
Is that in the Woodmere collection? Because I've never seen that painting.
No, that one is not in the Woodmere collection. Could you just go
Yeah,
back
I'm
one?
trying to.
Let me see if I have the name of where it appears now.
I can't read the blue.
No, I don't know, but I can find that out.
That's a nice painting.
It's a beautiful painting, it really is. And that is one of his earlier paintings. Okay. Well, here we have another picture of Hovenden. At the end of the academic year, he went to live and work with the American Art Colony in Bon Avon in Brittany, which was led by Robert Wiley, who was also a painter. And there he painted pictures of the peasantry. And I think he found a sense of community in Paris, which sort of was a continuing of his past and what laid ahead in his future. He returned to America in 1880 and became a member of the Society of American Artists and an associate member of the National Academy of Design. He married Helen, who he had met in Brittany, and he later settled at her father's homestead. So here we see Hovenden pose under a grape arbor at his home in Plymouth Meeting. Now, Helen's influence and commitment to the abolition movement will be seen in Hovenden's paintings of African Americans, which I'll share with you shortly. They are compassionate representations at a time when racial unity was rare. In 1886, he was briefly appointed professor of painting and drawing at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, replacing Thomas Akins upon the latter's controversial dismissal. Among Hovenden's students were the sculptor Alexander Sterling Calder on the left, and the leader of the Ashcan School, Robert Henry. Although he was an instructor for only a short period of time from 1886 to 1888, and then again in 1890 to 91, Hovenden was instrumental in launching the careers of other artists, like African-American Henry Ossawa Tanner on the right. Unfortunately, Tanner endured many racial injustices at PAFA when he was a student. Now, Hovenden sadly was killed at the age of 54 by a railroad locomotive at a crossing near his home in Plymouth Meeting. Newspaper accounts at the time reported that his death was the result of heroic efforts to save the life of a little girl, while a coroner's inquest really determined that his death was an accident. Now let's take a look at some of the work of this remarkable artist. Hovenden painted a few still lifes, in addition to his better-known genre scenes. Still Life in Roses was painted in 1874, and it appears to be a casual arrangement of objects, which disguises the care that Hovenden took in the placement of all of these objects. If you look at the tall canister, it leads the eye up to this beautiful Japanese fan. We have the flowers at the base, and that also wraps around very softly to the glass goblet with the flowers inside the goblet. This painting is in the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and it evokes the golden age of Dutch still life painting, which tradition Hovenden probably learned while he was in France. Like many artists, Hovenden made preliminary sketches of his subjects prior to the start of his paintings. Now here are 2 sketches he prepared that are in Woodmere's permanent collection. Woodmere was fortunate to receive a major gift of drawings and sketches by Thomas Hovenden from Styles Tuttle Colwell, who was a former trustee at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And as you know, he spent some time in Baltimore. As previously mentioned, after Thomas Hovenden completed his studies in Paris, he lived and painted in Bon Aven, France. His work during this period largely focused on images of peasants. On the left, Hovenden made this study of a Breton girl for a painting called The Breton Interior. In the finished work, the figure helps to convey the theme of family and tradition and loyalty as she watches her grandmother mold bullets over hot charcoal for soldiers during the War of Hovenden. This is a very small drawing. It's only 4 by 4¼ inches. But you can see, even just looking at his sketches, what a wonderful draftsman he really was. Now on the right is another study by Hovenden of a woman who later appears in the 1880 painting In Hoc Signo Vinces, which was the painting that you pointed out in their home. The finished painting depicts an invented scene again from the Wars of Vendée during the French Revolution. And this study actually was the start of one of the figures that you'll see in the actual painting. Now this graphite on paper is 16 inches by 10 inches. And most of his work in France, when he did some of these interiors that you'll see, he used the townspeople as his models. And here is the oil painting that we spoke about. And the title refers to the insignia of Constantine the Great and means, "In this sign you will conquer." The painting depicts a volunteer soldier from the War of Vendée. A woman is pinning the insignia of the Vendean royalist insurgents to her husband's shirt as he prepares to leave to combat the revolutionary regime in Paris. And now if you look closely, you'll see the woman featured behind the wife as she is putting the bread inside a bag. And this was not unusual at the time of packing bread and giving it to soldiers before they went off to war. And this is, you see the really beautiful composition, his ability to draw these figures and convey their expressions. He looks very stoic, the man who is going off to war. But I do love the little girl helping the woman put the bread in the sack. It's really a beautiful painting. And this painting is now in the Detroit Institute of Art's collection. Okay, this is, without doubt, one of my favorite Hovenden paintings. Now, he is a master storyteller, Hovenden, and his narrative work, I think, is just wonderful. And if we could, just for a moment, take a look at this painting, and I'm not going to tell you the name of the painting yet, but what's going on?
The guy's wooing the woman.
Excuse me?
The guy's romancing the woman.
The guy's romancing. How do you know that?
Well, he has his arm around her shoulder, he's leaning into her.
Mm-hmm. Do you notice what she's holding in her hand? I don't know if you can see it. She is holding a ring. And if I had just gotten a ring, I don't know if I would have that expression. She looks like, am I going to marry this man or not? But what you said was very correct. He is romancing her. I love the way he is drawn. He's leaning into her. There's a chair that's behind her, and if you can see it, I'm not sure in the slide, but his knee is bent. He's really leaning into her, and he's saying, please, please. It's the name of this painting is Faint Heart Never Won Fair Lady. Okay, and but the other thing that's interesting is if you look at her other hand, which is holding the corner of a table, it looks like it's like a turquoise velvet on the table, she has a wedding band on. So, I don't know what's going on here, but it's really a beautiful painting because the satin in her dress, if you saw this in person, it looks like you can feel it. And the other interesting thing is that is a self-portrait of Hovenden. And the woman is Helen. He painted his wife. This is in the permanent collection at Woodmere, and it's usually up in the Founders Gallery. It's a beautiful painting.
It's up right now, as a matter of fact.
It's 38 inches by 19 inches, and it actually was a gift of Helen's niece, Nancy Corson, to the museum in 2003. During his time in Paris, Hovenden painted several costume or historical genre subjects in the 17th century dress. Hovenden, as we said, painted several family scenes involving African American couples. In Contentment, an older couple enjoys each other's company after a meal. The wife is clearing the dishes while talking to her husband. The man looks like he's listening attentively. He appears very relaxed in a rocker, and he's holding his pipe. They're shown in their own home, which suggests that they've achieved a level of personal success. This oil on canvas was painted in 1881 and is in the collection of the Columbus Museum. Now, Hovenden's sensitive portrayals of African American life likely inspired fellow Philadelphia artist Henry Ossawa Tanner, who was his student in Papa. Now, shown on the left, which is currently in the Brooklyn Museum of Art, is Tanner's The Banjo Lesson. Tanner and Hovenden met in the early 1880s when Tanner was a student. Tanner's warm portrayal of an elderly man teaching the banjo to a youngster is reminiscent of the banjo theme, which was very popular during the 1880s. The Baltimore Herald wrote after Hovenden's death, Mr. Hovenden did more to instill into Tanner a good technical knowledge of painting. He seemed to infuse into Tanner a comprehension of and a sympathy with the broader, deeper things of life and art. Now, pictured on the right is Hovenden's I Knowed It Was Ripe. This was painted in 1885, now it's in the Hampton University Museum. Sunlight is streaming across the young boy's smiling face and body, which leads the viewer's eye to a freshly cut watermelon. Now, this depiction of a young African-American boy enjoying watermelon could have been interpreted as a racial stereotype that was perpetuated by many during the Jim Crow era. But according to Lawrence Woods in his essay, Home, Hearth, and Humanity, a triumph over racial stereotyping of African Americans, he wrote, despite all the negative connotations associated with the depiction of African Americans, two Philadelphia artists, one black and one white, created honest and sincere paintings of black life and culture. Thomas Hovenden, an Irish immigrant, and Henry Ossawa Tanner, the son of an African Methodist minister, used their considerable artistic talents to advance the role to which African Americans were assigned in American genre paintings. After 1885, Hovenden stopped using dialect in titles, and in the late 1880s, he stopped painting black subjects entirely. Perhaps this was because of the increased stereotypical imagery of African Americans in the 1890s, and Hovenden was not willing to help advance this type of imagery.
The one interesting thing is their use of color.
Excuse me?
The one interesting thing to me is their use of color.
Mm-hmm.
I like Tanner's work, but Tanner's colors are more muted.
That's
and-
true.
And these colors are brighter. And they both look very nice, and they both display different moods for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The painting, the Tanner's painting, I think is just so warm. And I think maybe that warmth is also conveyed because it is soft and muted colors. I think you're right about that. Okay. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry was an effort by abolitionist John Brown from October 16th to 18th in 1855 to initiate a slave revolt in southern states by taking over the U.S. arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. The revolt failed, and the 22 men with him were defeated by the U.S. Marines. 10 of the raiders were killed, 7 were tried and executed, and 5 escaped. The raid was said to be the prelude to the Civil War. On the left is a photograph of John Brown in 1859, the same year of the raid. The raid was extensively covered in the press due to the advent of the telegraph, and it became a national crisis with reporters traveling to the site. And it's very similar now with social media. We get information every couple minutes. I mean, if you look on the internet. And here, really, to tell this story, reporters came from all over to Harper's Ferry. The raid was the first viewed as madness, the work of a fanatic. However, later it was Brown's words during his trial that turned him into a hero and an icon for the Union. He said in part, "Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit, so let it be done." Hovenden's interest in African American themes developed after his marriage to Helen in 1881, and that year he received a commission from a New York businessman named Robbins Battelle to depict an incident in the life of the militant abolitionist John Brown. From 1882 to 1884, Hovenden created this epic work titled The Last Moments of John Brown, shown on the right. To prepare for this painting, he visited Harper's Ferry in Virginia, the site of Brown's imprisonment, to examine the locale. Brown was captured, tried for treason against the Commonwealth of Virginia, murder, and inciting a slave insurgent. A jury found him guilty of all 3 counts, and he was sentenced to death and executed on December 2nd, 1859. Interestingly, Brown, with a rope around his neck, is portrayed on his way to the gallows. He pauses to kiss a black baby held out by its mother. In a scene filled with emotion, this large oil on canvas measures 77 inches by 63 inches. It took him 2 years to do the research and to complete the painting, and it is currently in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. When the painting was exhibited in New York and then later in Philadelphia, art critics praised Hovenden's work. One New York critic said, "The most significant and striking historical work of art ever executed in the Republic," and in Philadelphia, a critic wrote, "Best American historical picture yet produced." Now, the people that are here again, he used models, not professional models, but people he knew. He had posed, took pictures, and painted from them and put the whole thing together. Have any of you seen that painting before? It's really magnificent. If you have an opportunity to go and see it, it's really something. Okay. The Robin Stain was painted in 1890, and again, it features his daughter Martha, but Martha now is a teenager. And this is a lovely painting. She's set in the woods. She's gazing up to the sky. She's holding it looks like a straw hat in her left hand and holding onto a branch. And in a way, to me, she looks like she's daydreaming. But this is in Woodmere's collection. And I believe that Woodmere purchased the painting in 2019. Now this is one of Hovenden's best known and popular paintings, and it was done in 1890. It's called Breaking Home Ties. This oil on canvas measures 52 by 72 inches, and it captures the emotional moment as a son bids farewell to his mother before leaving the family home to go off and seek his fortune in the city. His mother places her hands on his shoulder for a final embrace, and around the room were other family members, ranging in age from a young sister seated by the family dog on the left to a grandmother in the background who has also a very stoic face. The paintings is in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. One very interesting thing to point out, the dog is painted beautifully, and many believe that Helen painted the dog. As in Hovenden's Breton paintings, the setting for the scene and the furnishing underscores nostalgia and a simpler time. When the painting was first exhibited at the Pennsylvania Canyon in 1891, it received critical acclaim. One reviewer said, "No other picture at the Academy in an exhibition which is so far in advance of any before approaches this painting in the attention it has gained from the public or the love it has won from its gazers." Voted the most popular painting at the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, Breaking Home Ties captured America's imagination as few other paintings did. As the century became industrialized and urban centers grew, the 1890s saw the decline of the small family farm and the necessity for young sons to go into the city. This scene in this photograph is Thomas actually finishing the painting, and standing over his shoulder is his son, Toss. Completed in 1893, Bringing Home the Bride was displayed alongside Breaking Home Ties at the Chicago World's Fair. This oil on canvas is 58 by 78, and it provides a happy ending to the young boy going off into the world to find his fortune. He's coming home years later with his bride, and he seeks approval from his family. The gentleman sitting in the chair is his father, being introduced to the son's bride. This painting appeared in the Academy's 63rd annual exhibition, and newspaper accounts at the time touted the public's eagerness to view this work, and it could be because of the popularity of Breaking Home Ties. Unfortunately, the work did not receive an award, nor did the Academy offer to purchase it, and today the painting is at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. Now this beautiful oil-on painting is called Jerusalem the Golden, and is one of Hovenden's last works, and was completed in 1894, a year before he died. The 30 by 40 inch painting shows a beautiful woman, bathed in light, sitting very relaxed on a chaise. And to her right on the floor with a pensive look is a man with his hand on his chin. And all the way in the corner, opposite the man, you can see faintly a woman playing the piano. So it seems to me that both the man and the woman are listening to the music. Now, Thomas Hoveden's life experiences influenced his beliefs, his understanding, and his art. A realistic genre painter, his paintings conveyed the value of everyday activities involving community, home, and family. And now, Nicole is going to finish it up.
So at the time of Thomas's tragic death in 1895, Thomas was in the midst of painting a painting called Founders of a State. It was never completed. It was a rather large painting, and it had a quality of epic proportions and vision. It was painted in honor of the pioneer settlers who would form new home ties out west. Although unfinished, the painting was exhibited in honor at the National Academy of Design and also at PAFA. Helen was quite taken by the painting, and rather than returning it to his studio, she hung it in the picture gallery at her home, and it dominated the room. This painting is now at the Historical Society of Montgomery County in Norristown. After his death, Helen dedicated a great deal of her time as an outspoken voice in the regulation of railroad crossing safety. She would occasionally exhibit some of her work at PAFA and other smaller venues, which would frequently include paintings of horses and portraits. She traveled to New York to attend exhibitions of other artists and remained engaged in the world of art throughout the remaining years of her life. She died quietly in 1935 at the age of 89. Thomas and Helen's love of family and the arts was reflected in their work and their lives. Their lives were deeply affected by their family ties, the inequalities of the fellow man, and the ever-changing world around them. In their work, they attempted to avoid the racial stereotype and gave the African-American persona dignity, respect, and warmth. Although Thomas's life was cut too shortly, his work and the work of Helen's no doubt brought a light to artistic excellence and compassion in the portrayal of the human condition. That's it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I do want to thank Hildy Tao, Curator of Education at the Woodmere, Amanda Monroe, Assistant Curator at the Woodmere. Special thanks to David Contasta, who is Professor of History at Chestnut Hill College, Gail Momjian, former Director of the Plymouth Meeting Historical Society, and finally, sincere thanks to Anne and Roy Wilson for sharing their photos and recollections of Helen's work. Thank you all for being here today. Okay, oh yeah, I know we have a hard 1:30. I don't know if anyone had any questions, but we'll be here afterwards if anyone wanted to ask a question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. That was excellent. Thank you. As I mentioned, if you do want to stick around for a few minutes, have some questions for them, I do want to let you know they're working on our fire alarm system. So if we hear the alarm go off, we do not need to evacuate the building. They're just testing things. So just give you that heads up. But please stick around and ask some questions. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you all for coming out in the cold to be with us. Do join us next month. We have Beth Kephart, who is going to talk about her life in paper. She wrote a book about it, and it's really very interesting, the art of paper. I had no idea, but do join us for that. And thank you again for being here. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.